morning. Welcome to First Edition, the online ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles here in this amazing congregation, and we are thrilled that you've joined us on this day for worship. And we want you to know, no matter who you are, where you're from, where you might be going, what you believe, what you don't believe, or anything else at all, you are loved and accepted here as you are. Right now there's a QR code up on the screen. Take a moment, won't you please? Use the camera option on your phone. Click on the link that appears, and then sign in on that link. Let us know that you've been joining us for worship. Send in a prayer concern if you have one, and make a gift for the offering if you'd like to do so. We'd love to hear from you. My sermon today is part one in a new sermon series for the month of January called Through It All. It's based on an old gospel song by Andre Crouch, a Grammy Award-winning gospel singer from back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's one of my favorite songs as a kid, and it really is a promise that God's love is with us forever. You're going to hear Arthur Marks, one of our soloists here, sing this song as well. It's going to be a beautiful time of worship. I'm glad you've joined us.
I've had many tears and sorrows. I've had questions for tomorrow. There have been times I didn't know right from wrong. But in every situation, God gave blessed consolation. Let my trials come to only make me strong. I've been to lots of places, and I've seen a lot of faces. There have been times I felt so all alone. But in my lonely hours, yes, those precious lonely hours, Jesus let me know that I was his own. And I'm singing through it all, through it all. I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. For the storms he's brought me through. For if I never had a problem, I wouldn't know how he could solve them. I never know what faith in God could do. Yes, I'm singing through it all. Through it all,
Janelle, Andre Crouch died 10 years ago this month. 10 years ago this month, and somewhere in eternity, he's smiling right now for your rendition. Thank you. You heard the lyrics. Through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Simple, beautiful, powerful. Through it all. Think of what that means for you and me. Through everything we encounter, the highest highs, the lowest lows, through it all, God is present to us. Maybe especially, as Paul's words just implied, in those moments when we have no words, when the Spirit gives us sighs too deep for words. Through it all. Andre Crouch was the son of a black Pentecostal preacher. Grew up in Southern California, going to church every Sunday with his sister, singing with his mom and his dad in church, and learned to play the piano by creating a cardboard keyboard on the floor and would hit the keys. And that's the way he learned how to play the piano and to practice it. Then along in 1971, he wrote this song, Through It All. He'd been through some tough things in his life. He'd already been through some difficult times, and he decided to put this life experience into a song. He was a Grammy Award-winning artist, by the way. He won 7 Grammys. He was nominated 20 times. He won 3 Dove Awards. That's the Christian music equivalents of the Grammys. He also was nominated for an Academy Award for the original score of the movie The Color Purple, which first came out in 1984. In addition to that, he was well-known arranger and producer of music in Hollywood, in Southern California. He worked with people like Stevie Wonder, Madonna, and Michael Jackson. By the way, Michael Jackson and Madonna were born the same year I was. I have no idea what that means, but I just thought I'd share that with you. He was amazing. Through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was one of the voices, in my mind, in my view. He was the voice of black gospel music, of gospel music, and the way he was able to, frankly, sing to both black and white crowds. There's even a story about a little boy who first went to hear Andre Crouch sing. He was a little young black boy who went to a white church, but his white church invited Andre to lead music, and for the first time in his life, he saw this black man leading worship up on the front, and he thought, oh my goodness, maybe God knows me too. When I first heard this song, it was right before I started the 8th grade, 1971, right after it came out. My youth minister, John Alley, played it for us at the beginning of one of our Sunday evening youth programs. I remember sitting there thinking, maybe God knows me. Maybe God even knows me. I'm not going to try to be too over dramatic this morning. Do you remember what it was like to be 12? To be 13? I mean, if you think your life is going through changes right now and disruptions, just go back to when you were 13. Our bodies, our minds are changing rapidly. Our understanding of how the world works is changing. We've gone from a simple understanding as children to see the world as this complex place with all kinds of issues and things that surround us. In my own life, change was a constant. Change and, frankly, turmoil were constant. I lived in 14 different homes from birth until age 17, went to 13 different schools from kindergarten through my senior year of high school. Change was a constant. And then I was sitting there in John Alley's living room for our Sunday evening youth meeting, part of Park Avenue Christian Church in Montebello, California. And I hear those words, through it all. Through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Think about what that word trust means. That's the word we use when people join our church. It's not a matter necessarily of I believe this or I believe that or I don't believe this or I don't believe this. I've learned to trust in Jesus and Jesus' teachings, his preaching, his way of life. And that for us is a guidepost, a torchlight, as it were. I'll say more about a torch in a few minutes. Learn to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Let's put the lyrics that Arthur just sang for us up again. I've had many tears and sorrows. I've had questions for tomorrow. There have been times I didn't know right from wrong. Leave the words up for a moment, guys. Do you hear how confessional that is? I didn't know right from wrong. You may not know, and I hesitate to bring this up, but at one point in his life, Andre was arrested for possession of cocaine. I didn't know right from wrong. He's confessing his failings. He's confessing his failures. He's confessing that sometimes he's fallen. But this isn't a word of judgment. This isn't a word of put down. This isn't him feeling like a terrible, horrible human being. This is not Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God. No, no, and no. I read that when I was in high school in our American literature class. I read it again in seminary. I remember reading it through a homiletics textbook, and when I got to the end of that sermon, all I wrote at the very end of it was in large capital letters, N-O, period. No. This is not sinners in the hands of an angry God. These are the hands of a God who will catch us when we fall. Who will be there when we fail. Not with words of judgment and criticism, but with words of love, mercy, and forgiveness. With words of hope. It's a beautiful promise that no matter where we are in life, God will come to find us. God will come not to push us down, not to slap us in the hands of an angry deity, but to raise us up with the gifts of faith, hope, and love. You know, we sing a song here at the 9 o'clock service. Janelle, I'm going to mess up the lyrics, but it's essentially from the moment that I wake up to the moment I lay down, I'll sing of the goodness of God. It's one of my favorite songs that we sing here. Maybe you heard those words on Thursday. Did anybody watch the funeral service for President Jimmy Carter? There was a point where his son Jason gave a powerful eulogy. And he said, in my church, I think he lives in Atlanta, in my church we sing that song. From the moment that I wake up, I will sing of the goodness of God. He said, I confess to you that I don't always sing from the moment I wake up to the moment I lay down of the goodness of God. But I believe my father, President Carter, sang of the goodness of God every day of his life. And then he went on to talk about his father and the way he lived his life in light of the teachings of Jesus the Christ, who was, as Jason said about his grandfather, his Lord and Savior. Did he have failings and failures? Of course. Do you know anyone who hasn't? Have you not had any failings or failures? If you're not sure about that, ask someone who loves you. But then there was another moment in the service that was just as powerful. Did some of you raise your hand? Did some of you watch it? Oh, good, you did. I would recommend you go back and watch it if you haven't seen it, or you can even read through the transcripts. The moment I'm thinking of is when President Gerald Ford's son, Steve, got up to read a eulogy that his father, President Ford, had written before his death in 2006 in honor of Jimmy Carter. Steve Ford's words were beautiful before he read his father's. He said to the family, to the Carter family, I love the way our families have interacted together over the years, the friendship and the love that we have for each other. And I want you to know that I've been praying for all of you since your father's, your grandfather's, your great-grandfather's death. And then he read this eulogy written by Gerald Ford, which was amazing. He acknowledges in the eulogy that the two of them were bitter political rivalries. I mean, you probably remember, do you not, that Carter beat Ford, President Ford then, in 1976 in the general election for president. Yet within 5 years, they became great friends. And Gerald Ford said, Jimmy, your legacy will be one of compassion and peace. And I thank God, this part I'm paraphrasing, I thank God for the love our two families have found. John, I thought of this when you gave your prayer this morning. It gives me hope for America that we can find a place where we can stand together in loving friendships, despite what might be our rivalries and our differences. In the text that Sarah, you guys can take the words down, thank you. In the text that Sarah read a few moments ago, there was this phrase, with sighs too deep for words. The Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. Have you ever been at a place like that when you're just overwhelmed with life, overwhelmed with maybe your own failures, maybe something stupid you've done, or maybe something unfair that another person has done to you, put you down, held you down, treated you unkindly, unfairly? Have you ever been in a moment like that where you have nothing to say? All you have is a groan? That's a gift from God. I remember going to see a young boy in the hospital who was only 16 years old. He was lifting weights, getting ready for baseball practice prior to going right out on the field when he had some kind of a heart issue, and they thought he was dead. They rushed him to the hospital. I remember running in to the emergency room and finding him on the cart, his name was Charlie, taking Charlie into room to be treated, and right behind him were his mom and his dad, my very good friends Dan and Shelley let out this groan, "Oh, my boy." That was the Spirit. Charlie came back. It was an amazing experience. Thank God for the doctors and nurses who were trained and could figure out exactly what was going on. And he came back and to this day is living a full and wonderful life. But we've had moments like that, haven't we? We didn't have words. We didn't know what to say. The Spirit, Paul writes, intercedes with sighs too deep, with groanings too deep for words. What a promise. What a powerful witness that is to us. And it's also a sign of the humanity of God. In many ways, that's what Andre Crouch is singing about when he sings this song, "Through It All, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God." He's singing about the humanity of God. And that might sound like an unusual phrase, but think about this for a moment. We often confess that in Jesus, we see in him a full reflection of the divine. Oftentimes, I will say, Jesus was a human being fully alive, and in that full aliveness, he reflected God's very Spirit out to all those who encountered him. It was in seeing him filled with that life that people began to see him as a reflection, as a presentation of the divine. That's what we hear in Paul's words about this God who intercedes for us. It's the same Spirit, by the way, that was there hundreds of millions of years ago, or billions. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. Whenever it was the Big Bang occurred, it was that Spirit over the chaos that breathed new life into the universe. That same Spirit breathed new life into human beings, and that same Spirit today works within your very soul. Peter Gomes writes about a church that found courage through the Spirit. As difficult as times were, as difficult as things they were facing in this particular church, they were able to let those sighs of the Spirit give them faith, hope, and love. The three gifts that Paul names in 1 Corinthians 13. And those three gifts then gave them courage. And because of that courage, they were able to do the best of things in the worst of times. The church is one that was built in the 17th century in Leicestershire County, Ireland. At the time the church was built, there was a terrible civil war going on between the Royalists and the Puritans. I'd totally forgotten about this until I read Professor Gomes' sermon this last week. I don't think I ever actually remembered it from any time in my studies. And he even says, any but the most obscure historians have forgotten about this, but it was an ugly, violent-filled time of carnage where these two groups were battling with each other. And yet this church decided to do the right thing. This is a sign. I'm going to put these words up here. These are the words on a sign on the western door of the church in Leicestershire County, England, where you can still see it today. When all things sacred were throughout the nation either destroyed or profaned, Sir Robert Shirley founded this church whose singular praise is to have done the best things in the worst of times and hoped them in the most calamitous. Leave it up for a moment. Did you hear that last phrase? To have done the best things in the worst of times and hope them in the most calamitous. Do you hear that word, First Community? In our church, in our culture, in our country, in our world, we are called to do the best things in the worst of times. We are called to stand up with faith, hope, and courage and be the people Jesus calls us to be. To be the people that inspired President Carter, that inspired President Ford, that created a friendship between them. We are called in the worst of times to do the best things. It's a powerful word from hundreds of years ago that speaks to us in this moment. There was an interesting phrase in the text, you can take that down, that Sarah read, where God was described as searching our hearts. In some other translations that I looked at, God is actually named as the searcher of hearts. As far as I know, and I've read the Bible a few times, it's the only place in all of Scripture, Old Testament or New Testament, where God is described as the searcher of hearts. It's a fascinating phrase. I looked up the Greek for searcher. It literally implies the creation of a torch that's lit in order to go searching in a dark cave or even a darkened home where there are no candles or anything else. And it might sound like to you and me, the searcher of hearts means that God is going to be looking at our hearts to find stuff. And maybe, well, I can't speak for everyone in the room, but I know a few of you, maybe we don't want God to look in our hearts. Maybe we don't want God to see some of those things. I'm talking about myself mostly, so let's just be clear. But I suspect if you're not sure, again, ask someone who loves you. They might be able to point those out for you. But it's not about God looking for something to judge us with. It's about God searching our hearts so that no matter what God finds, God can there at that very place then bring the light to us. Jesus declared, I'm the light of the world. It's that light that shines in the darkness. It's that light that shines in our failures. It's that light that shines in our fallings and guides us to a new place, a new life, a new beginning, again and again and again, because through it all, we can learn to trust in Jesus. We can learn to trust in God. At the end of Romans 8, which we didn't read, Paul concludes with a statement that is, in my view, one of the most, if not the most powerful statement in the Bible. It's a statement that can be used as our statement of faith, of who our church is, of what we believe, of what we stand for. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's the one where he says, there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. That's who we are. I've used that many, many times. Mary Kate Buchanan has used it many, many times in memorials, in funeral services, as a way of saying, this is who we are. This is a text in our Bible that reflects who we are calling ourselves to be, that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. I remember a time I quoted those in a funeral. It was about 30 years ago. It was for a man named Robert, who was only 38 years old when he died. Robert was gay. He died of complications of HIV/AIDS. His parents loved him deeply. They accepted him as he was. They didn't kick him out of the home, as so many people did 30 years ago. They didn't try to shun him or any of those kinds of things. They accepted him and loved him. And yet at the funeral, they said, Glenn, we don't want to talk about his sexuality. Can you just leave that out? And so I honored that request. But when I walked into the sanctuary at the church where this service was held, it was packed, as you might imagine. On the right side were his parents, who were in their early 60s, and everyone on that side with them, I recognized many of their friends, were most of them in their 60s and 70s, and a few older. On the left side, mostly young men in their 20s, 30s, maybe some in their 40s, a few women, packed. And immediately I could feel the tension as I walked into the room. Well, we honored Robert's life. We celebrated his life. We told many of the stories of his goodness and his grace and the way he lived to the fullest of life as he could have. We also recognized the sorrow and the pain of losing someone at just 38 years of age. But still, when it was done and it was a time for the benediction, it felt like there was this tension. I walked out to the chancel steps to give the benediction like I always do, and I just decided to change what I'd planned to say. Instead, I quoted Romans 8. There is nothing in all of creation that can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Neither life, nor death, nor peril, nor persecution, nor sword, nor lifestyle, nor sexuality, nor anything else in all of creation that can separate us from God's love. I said amen, and I walked down the center aisle with my heart pounding. Not long after I got to the back door to greet folks as they were leaving the service, a young man from that side of the sanctuary came up to me. He took a hold of my hand and he pulled me in close to his face. I mean, he was right here. And he said, Pastor, do you believe that? Do you believe that nothing can separate us from God's love? And I said, in my calmest voice, Yes, I believe it with all my heart. And then he was still going. He was still there. He was tightly holding my hand. He was leaning right in here, and he said, what about this church? Does this church believe that? 30 years later, he still wants to know. Do we believe this? Is this who we are? Does this word, this singular, powerful word, that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God, there is nothing that can pull us apart from God's grace, nothing that can pull us away from God's forgiveness, nothing that can eliminate God's mercy? Do we believe that through it all, we can trust in Jesus and we can trust in God? Do we? Because if we do, then we'll have more than enough faith, more than enough hope, and more than enough love to take on whatever comes our way in this culture, in this country, in this world. I believe that with all my heart. Through it all, God will be with us in this moment and the next. Maybe you have a prayer this morning that you'd like to share quietly, silently with God. Already some have lit candles. You're invited in this time to light a candle. I'm going to say a prayer for our church. I'm going to say a prayer for our country. I'm going to say a prayer for my family and friends in California. And I'm going to say a prayer for our world. Because together, we can bring the light of God into darkness.
Let us lead with patience, with a gentle word, bearing every burden, laying down the old hurt. When our feet are stumbling and the climb is steep, all you people of goodwill, will you walk with me? Would you walk with me through the wilderness when we cannot see through our differences? When the dust is settled and the votes are cast, would you walk with me? Ooh, 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 ooh. Let us lead with kindness, with a listening ear, hearing every story, laying down our old fears. Though our hearts are broken and the pain runs deep, all you people of goodwill, would you walk with me? Would you walk with me through the wilderness when we cannot see through our differences? When the dust is settled and the votes are cast, would you walk with me? 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 Would you walk with me?
Through it all, God promises to be with us in the lowest of lows and the highest of highs. I hope that message resonates with you throughout this week. Right now, we'd like to invite you to consider making a financial gift to First Community Church. We'll put the QR code up there so you can use that as a way of capturing it with your camera option on your phone. Click on the link and you'll see how easy it is to give. It takes quite a bit to support this ministry. We'd love if you join us in making